Chapter 22. Guy is cleared. Guy had to get used to being in jail again. His only company was Bill Exxon. Once it was discovered that he was one of the men who had robbed Mr. Gervais Holly, Exxon was dragged from his bed in the neighbouring house. Little sympathy was given to criminals in those days, and desperately ill as he was, it made no difference. He had to be kennelled in what was thought to be his proper place. Guy tended him as best he could, though there was no hope for him. The tough old wretch was going fast, in spite of all Guy could do. Once or twice he rallied and even regained consciousness, but always drifted back into a coma, which became deeper every time. Meanwhile, things took place in the town outside. From the barred windows, Guy managed to see a good deal, and soothed his boredom and anxiety by looking on. Under Slim Jordan, their thin, black-eyed leader, the local rangers had advanced upriver at once. But no word had yet come back to tell of what was happening there, or whether Foxley's stockade still held out. Guy worried badly over this. Grim as his own case was, it was far easier than the terrible fate that would descend on the garrison, if the stockade fell. He was plagued with horrid visions, imagining what might have befallen Alistair and Riach and the others. Most of all, he fretted about Anne. The dread that the savages might have got her was more than he could bear. Nursing Exxon and gazing out of the window, he tried to put these things from him, knowing that they could do no good. In any case, he himself would have to face the music very soon. It would come when the Indian scare had died down, he supposed. He hoped he would be able to meet it well. After the rangers left, others kept coming in. Men in twos and threes from outlying farms and cabins, and larger parties from other settlements, flocked into the wide street day after day. Each had a gun of some kind, with a knife and hatchet at his belt, and a blanket roll slung behind him. They were militia. All of them argued, and many got drunk and came to blows. To Guy they seemed wild and undisciplined, not hesitating to say what they thought of their leaders, or anything else for that matter. All the same, there was a formidable air about them, a hard, tough independence, which promised a good account of themselves in action. They wasted no time. Crowding in a mob around the courthouse steps, they picked their own officers by vote and formed themselves into companies. All this was done remarkably quickly, considering the amount of bragging and argument they got through. When they had sorted themselves out, they passed on into the woods, hurrying towards the wilderness that Guy had left so recently. He stared after them, wishing he was going too. After the last of them had gone, slouching off in ragged file with their long, lithe stride, a battalion of the King's troops arrived. The soldiers came up the river in big boats called gondolas, and landed beneath the cannon on the bank. In their smart ranks they marched to parade in the streets outside. Between their red regimentals and pipe-clay equipment, and the homespun cloth and leather of the militia, there was a great contrast. Watching their rigid formation and clockwork movements, Guy thought of the savages, lean, murderous ghosts, who could squirm their painted bodies through the denser thicket without a rustle, to attack like maddened tigers. Who would deal with them best, he wondered, these well-drilled regulars, or the untamed backwoodsmen who knew the forest like the Indians themselves? In his heart he doubted if the soldiers would come off well, especially in the crowding timbers which lay ahead. There the fighting would be man to man, with no room to perform the drill book operations they knew. In this he was right. A few years later, General Braddock was to find it out near Fort Duquesne at the cost of his life and the massacre of his army. However, the present task of these troops was to defend the town. If the Indians managed to get this far, their campfires burned at night like glowworms just beyond the houses, and during the day the air rang with the staccato bawling of orders. From the first, all the citizens who had not gone with the militia were kept hard at it, digging earthworks and filling baskets with soil, a task in which the soldiers joined as soon as they arrived. Lead was melted and run for bullets, cattle driven in, to be herded in wattle pens. All kinds of activity went on, to get the place into a state of defence. In the midst of this hubbub, he and Exon had a visitor. Thomas Cole, the fat sheriff, unlocked the cell door one afternoon and flung it open. Paying no heed to his prisoners, he stood back and bowed respectfully. "These are the rogues, sir," he announced. "The cell's a trifle high, I'm sorry to say, not being exactly a lady's boudoir. I can have 'em fetched out if you'd rather." "Pray, don't put yourself to inconvenience," a not unpleasant voice replied. "Though there is something of an aroma, now you mention it. I imagine even a skunk might find it rather fruity. Sink me." A finely clad figure stepped through the doorway, with a cambric handkerchief to his nose. When he took it away, Guy recognised Mr. Gervase Holly. Holly favoured him with a contemptuous stare. "So, you brought back the money, did you?" he asked lightly. "I take it you weren't able to spend it in the wilderness. No alehouses or gambling hells out there, perhaps?" Guy could only stare at him. There was nothing he could say that might convince the other of his innocence. "Well, my good scoundrel, I'm vastly obliged to you. I swear," Holly resumed, "I confess that I had no hope of seeing it again, or of renewing our acquaintance either." His voice changed, and he rapped out harshly. "Well, what have you to say for yourself? I suppose you'll whine that it was the others who filched the guineas, and your hand didn't strike down a trusted servant. Speak, you murdering dog!" "Sir, you have said for yourself all that I could say." There was a lump in Guy's throat, and it was difficult to get the words out. "I do assure you most humbly that I had no part in it." Holly sneered. "Aye, but what's your assurance worth?" he said, eyeing him shrewdly. None the less, his voice was less bitter as he went on. "You'll have to do better than that, fellow. When you come up before the beak, he won't be flamed by your pious look, I promise you." Holly's glance shifted to the fell pallet of straw on which Exon lay. "And this other rascal's injured, is he?" he observed. "Faith, he don't look too chipper. I doubt if he'll come to trial, judging by the colour of his gills." To Guy's surprise, a croak came from the reeking straw. "You speak truth, mate. I'm going to diddle 'em, after all. They won't hang poor Bill Exon." The old man was conscious, and, for a wonder, his mind was clear. That in itself was an omen. Exon tried to grin. Addressing Holly, he gasped, "Now I'm going. I'll give you the straight on it. Might as well tell the truth for once." Holly went to stoop over him. His harshness had gone, and there was pity in his face when he looked down at the dying man. Thoughtless and easy-going as he was, he had never been ill-natured. "Get it all off your conscience, if it'll help you," he soothed, not unkindly. "We're listening." Painfully, Exon began again. "It's right what Guy says, Governor. He never had anything to do with the job. It was the three of us that done it. Me and Seth and Miles Smeaton. Guy want in on it. I'll give you my dying oath." His eyes closed, and for a moment they thought he had gone off again. But after a space he raised his wrinkled lids. "He's a good boy, is Guy, though a bit too fond of poking his nose into other folks' business, as I've told him, or he wouldn't be where he is now." In slow broken whispers Exon told how he and his confederates had planned the robbery and carried it out, how Guy and Joel Lees had interrupted them, and what had happened then. It was Miles, the flash cull, what done bully Joel, and Guy was going to sing out, but Seth napped him one with his cosh to stop him blowing the gaff. The three of them, Holly, Guy and the sheriff, had been listening to the tale. At this point Holly turned to Guy. "Is this true?" Guy nodded. He could not speak. Exon was still talking, but wondered now, and they could make little sense of his words. Finally he stopped, and his eyes closed for the last time. Holly stood up. He was grave, and his tone was sombre. "Do what you have to for that poor wretch," he said, turning to Cole. "And have this man out of here, and get him clean. Foh, if I'd known, I wouldn't have let a dog of mine die in a place like this." "But, sir," protested the sheriff, "he's in here for a murder. I durst let him go, not even to oblige you." "Fiddlesticks! He's my man, and I'll answer for him when he's wanted. Do as I say." So it came about that a few hours later Guy found himself in Jenkins' tavern, telling the story of his adventures to Mr. Holly and a purple-faced gentleman in a very modish wig, while they sat at their wine. The gentleman with the complexion got through a vast amount of wine, but it did not dim his wits enough to stop him asking all kinds of cunning questions. Guy was glad he was telling the truth. If he had been lying, the man in the wig would have caught him out time and again. They made him go through the whole of his tale and back again, especially the part about Sir Robert Aubrey and the stockade. When at last he finished, Holly turned to his companion and cocked a quizzical eye. "Well, my lord, what do you think?" he asked. The other looked Guy up and down with a cold, pitiless eye that reminded him strongly of the judge at Derby Aziz. "Humph," he growled, in the dry, precise accent he had. "I venture to think he may be telling the truth. Either that, or he's an uncommon talented liar. But we will learn more of that in time." "Thank you. Indeed, my lord." Holly's manner was deferential. "I'm most deeply in your debt. Do you think he deserves mercy?" My lord pursed his lips. "Well, considering he's saved some thousands of lives and averted a war, not to mention bringing back your money, I think he may look for some leniency. But we shall need proof of it, mind, when we get up there." Holly bowed. Then, addressing Guy, he said, "That will do for the moment. Tell the landlord to give you a feed and charge it to me." He paused, and then went on. "In the morning, His Excellency is going upriver to Foxley's place, to settle the Indian business. You and I will go with him. Until then, I regret that you will have to remain in the care of our mutual friend Mr. Cole."